Hello, there we go. Welcome to my session. Thank you for joining. Um, During the session, there's you can post the questions in the Q&A panel. So I started sharing. I hope you see the screen. Let me start with a story. The story goes like this. There was a pilot and he had a malfunction on his plane and he had to land in the desert. So he was stuck in the desert and trying to fix his plane, rather busy. And suddenly, out of nowhere, a little boy approaches him and asks him, "Please draw me a sheep." Of course, our pilot is perplexed and not sure what to do, but after some deliberation, he actually tries to draw him a sheep. So, but the boy's answer, "No, please, this sheep is already very ill. Make me another." Okay, so our guy gives it another shot, tries to draw this one, but the boy replies, "You have to see it, Joe. This isn't a sheep, it's a ram. It has horns." So what to do? Our hero tries for the third time, but the boy is still not satisfied. "This one is too old. I want a sheep who will live a long time." So instead of going on like this, um, our pilot tries a different approach. So he draws our boy a box and he says, "That's the box. The sheep you want is inside." The response from the little boy is, "That's exactly how I wanted it." So now where I'm going with this, there is a relation from this story to the presentation of mine regarding, do you really understand what people are asking you to do? And you're discussing with your customers or some other stakeholders. Do you really understand what they are, their needs? Hopefully my presentation is trying to bridge the gap between those two. So before we go on, this story is from a lovely book called The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, who was a pilot himself. The book is often described as a fairy tale for grown-ups. So I would recommend you to check it out. So my name is Mufrid Krilic. I work as a software architect and coach in a company called DIPS here in Norway. I'll be talking about domain storytelling, which is an interesting technique trying to help you enhance learning in your organization. Now, my company DIPS provide electronic patient records for Norwegian hospitals, and I've been in the market for more than 30 years. So I've been drawing for some of that experience. And the presentation will be based on a real-world use case from the domain of healthcare that me and my team have been working on. So why do we want to learn about domain storytelling? So in order to understand the business, you need to really understand the language in which the business operates, so-called domain language. So at least in any business with certain level of complexity, I would go so far to say that this is kind of precondition for providing valuable solutions. So understanding the language of business. So that's what we are trying to do here. So hopefully at the end of the presentation, you will have these takeaways. I will try to help you build your ability to communicate with domain experts on their terms. I will show you how to facilitate a customer workshop in an engaging way, and how to start with your development project. How will development team take the insights from the first two points over to their implementation phase. So let's start with the first one. Ability to communicate with domain experts on their terms. So that's what domain storytelling brings us to the table. It's a lightweight method to learn a domain language, as I said. So how do you learn any language? Any foreign language, human languages? Well, you could listen to people who speak the language, repeat what they said, and they confirm that what you said was correct. So why restrict this method only to human languages? So you can use this method to learn a business language. So it's a workshop technique. We arrange a workshop and we have facilitators that ask and guide domain experts along the way to explain how they work, what they do and participants of the workshops, I recommend try to gather domain experts from several areas of business, several departments. You need definitely a development team. Hopefully they provide good questions. Business will provide good answers. And you need a facilitator. It could be a member of your team. And you consider other stakeholders depending on your context. So the workshop flows as a series of short examples. During those discussion of those examples, you listen and you speak the domain language by visualizing those examples. Now, the focus on examples is rather important. We will show why in a short while. So for each example, you visualize it, you try to get confirmation from the domain expert that what you have visualized on the board is correct. And if everybody in the room agrees that for this particular example, we agree this is the correct representation. If there are some differences, some disagreements between domain experts or other stakeholders, you try to note them as textual annotations. The syntax of the main story, since we are trying to build visual examples, we need a pictographic language. So we need icons denoting actors in the business, people, group of people, persons, group of people, systems, electronic data systems or whatnot, and work objects that denote information that's being passed between the actors, and activities which denote which way the information flows. For types of for insights and knowledge that are not easily captured visually, we use textual annotations. So this is a kind of syntax. And so the main story in itself is, as I said, an example of what happens in the business. Focus on what really happens in the domain, not what could happen. So we are not trying to build an overview of complete business process in a single domain story. We try to capture what happens on given circumstances that depict this particular example. So focus on short examples for each domain story. Because you can learn more from a good example than from a bad abstraction. I like this quote. It's revealing something. And now we try to avoid, because we focus on short examples, we try to avoid branching and parallelism and if statements or whatnot, UML diagrams. We are not building sequence diagrams. We're trying to build stories on what really happens in the domain. So every game has a rules. What about this one? Well, if you notice that when you try to get the confirmation from the domain expert that what your story is correct, what you visualize is correct, if there is notable disagreements between domain experts, just create another domain story. So each domain expert gets their own story. If there are minor differences, just make a comment and go on. Any actor should not occur more than once in a story. Work object can occur multiple times. Activities should be labeled in order which they occur. This helps actually trace the story from the beginning to the end by tracing the activities label. And this one is rather important. Try to avoid a technical language during the workshop. As I mentioned, a goal of this part is to increase your ability to communicate with domain experts on their terms. That's why we don't talk about databases or microservices or any other technical flavor, things with technical flavor in domain storytelling workshops. Try to communicate, try to learn the business language. This is our goal. So I will show you how to build a domain story. As I mentioned, my company DIPS works in the market healthcare domain with the customers being Norwegian hospitals. So I will guide you through a use case that me and my development team worked on for some time, trying to provide support for group therapy in hospital. And I'll have to use some time to explain what group therapy is, which because it will provide to be beneficiary this understanding further on in the presentation. So for patients with identical diagnosis, sometimes the therapy has the best effect when done in a group. And again, my context are Norwegian healthcare. I definitely allow for differences in your local context. So, but this is what I'm familiar with. So, need to go on from there. And group therapy is used in mostly in mental health care, both adult and pediatric, but as well as in somatic healthcare. For instance, when there is group training focused on improving quality of life for certain types of patients, and it's beneficiary for them to do this training together in a group. So those are business areas in hospital that are utilizing group therapy. This slide actually it turns out to be rather important. So I'll get back to it towards the end of the presentation. So what are the steps of group therapy in the Norwegian hospitals? So you have to plan a group. Some physicians will say, okay, for these patients, they could profit from, they can have a good treatment if you treat them as a group for this condition. While medical secretary will create a group and lay out the schedule. So once the group has been scheduled or planned, the patients arrive at the scheduled appointments. So during they check in, and the medical secretary will register the attendance, deal with no-shows or cancellations, communicate with patients, and follow up on sending invoices. So we already see there are already a certain amount of tasks that need to be performed by this role, which gives a use case from the healthcare domain this non-trivial flavor, which could be challenging because many examples out there for methods, technologies, frameworks are rather simple, which is necessary. To understand something, we need simple examples to increase our comprehension. However, I try to present an alternative here. If you, after the presentation, are curious about trying this in your domain, perhaps this real-world example will show you that also the non-trivial stuff is this method is able to deal with it. That's why we focus on domain of healthcare. So let's build the domain story. Let's see how it actually looks like. I built this tool using a web tool from a company called Workspace Solutions. They are based in Germany, and they are actually the ones who have been promoting the technique of domain storytelling in the recent years. So I'll get back with some references to that. So using this web tool, you may start drawing your story. So here's our first step. for a group check-in. So what is the first thing that happens? We ask our domain expert, what happens? What is the follow? So, okay, patients start to arrive at the venue. Okay, so we draw a patient icon, they check in at the venue. So we already here have a group of patients, actor. We have a venue, which is a work object. We could decide in other contexts to have a venue as an actor in itself. In this context, it made sense to have it as a work object. And we have an activity. Patients check in at the venue, which is the first activity, number one. So this is our first step in a domain story. So we go on. The second step is a medical secretary will verify using a manually compiled patient list if all the patients that have been expected to arrive have actually arrived. So there is a list of patients who are expected and patients, these are checked against the patients that actually show up. So here we expand our story with another actor, medical secretary, and we have a work object manually compiled a patient list that is used to verify patients at the venue. And there we go. For the third step, this process illustrates the conversation that goes during the visualization between the facilitator and domain expert and development team. And the domain expert explains that he or she records the patient visit in the patient record system, which in this case is a computer system, using a manually compiled list. Now, here we already notice that we obey the rules of not um, repeating the actor more than once in the system, but we have two occurrences of manually compiled patient lists. So work objects can repeat themselves. This gives a certain level of flexibility to a domain story. And at this point in our workshop, we facilitator noted that there were many questions and discussions about how do you actually record this patient visit. So what about patients who didn't show up? What about patients who have canceled their appointment a priori? Those discussions, those questions, because the team used some time to comprehend this step, we note them as textual annotations. And there was also a question about when do you actually record a patient visit? That was the day after the appointment. So those things, we actually note them as textual annotation that could provide as valuable clues later on. So it's important to use those textual annotations. The next step will be supervising physician will formally approve the recorded patient visit. So the medical secretary does the typing in the system, while the physician will actually approve the recorded patient visit. And the last step, number 5, is when medical secretary sends an invoice to patients who have um, checked in or participated at this group appointment. So there you go. This is our domain story. As hopefully you see that there is already a level of complexity in this case, but this technique is able to capture this complexity or able to visualize this complexity in fairly concise manner. And on a single page of web page or a board, you're able to visualize the complete process of patient check-in and during for a group appointment, which gives you hopefully some clues on how powerful this technique could be to visualize variety of use cases, regardless of the domain. So usually we get some questions about, okay, we see that there is alternative methods to learn a domain language. It's important. but how about alternate? What is the domain language, domain storytelling the only game in town? Well, definitely not. Most people heard about event storming, at least in some communities. It's uh, very popular, and it tells the story of domain by plotting a timeline using domain events. It was being presented to the community by Alberto Brandolini. Another technique is impact mapping, with focus on goals you're trying to achieve and impacts you want to observe. It kind of suppresses the focus on the software you want to deliver. It still lingers around the edges on the impact map, but the focus is on the business. This was presented to the community by Gojko Ajic, and there is a book on both of them, both on impact mapping and on event storming. So one of the frequently asked questions are domain storytelling versus event storming. Well, event storming is very good at exposing the element of time. When we design our software, um, we design structures, and we design a message passing between the components, but the element of time is not easily captured. Event storming is really good at that, testing your comprehension of business processes as time goes by. Domain storytelling, on the other hand, is better at focusing on communication between people and software systems, more explicit about it. Event storming is very good at exploratory modeling. We can a big picture event storming session is really good at capturing the whole business process, if you like, and you can start from almost nothing and get to a valuable insights. It could be very explorative. However, there is something in domain storytelling which is truly remarkable. I call this deep listening. Most workshops are built around a group of people interacting together, but in domain storytelling, that's true as well. However, there is a setting where you really focus on trying to listen what domain experts are trying to tell you. So every domain expert get to tell her story, get it visualized, because while you're visualizing the domain story, you need to really focus on what's being said. So you really improve the collaboration with the team and the main experts in this setting of what I call deep listening. And if something that we developers need to get better in, is actually listening to the business. So that was part one. Let me see if we can switch gears a little bit and show you how to facilitate a customer workshop in an even more engaging way based on domain storytelling. Well, the first thing is I recommend mixing different techniques. Do not have a method lock-in if you're good in one technique. So do try to challenge yourself, learn other techniques. And what was there is a particular reason related to the main storytelling that this proved very useful, where this proved very useful is that there are some certain challenges that I have observed myself as trying to facilitate a number of workshops. The first one is distilling as is and to be domain stories. Be really specific about it. Are we talking about the business as it is today, or are we talking about what future will hold? So be very clear about it. And the facilitator can become a bottleneck. I'll try to show why. And on the third challenge is setting the stage for the main storytelling workshop. I'll actually recommend to start with something else than domain storytelling. So why this becoming a bottleneck is a real issue? Well, for facilitator, it actually juggles with three tasks all the way as a workshop goes on. You're trying to visualize the main story, you're trying to learn the domain language, and at the same time, you're keeping track of the essential comments for the participants. This can get rather stressful as the workshop proceeds. So why not ask someone to help you? Have a backstage facilitator, so you run the show on a whiteboard or a Miro board now these days, while you have a backstage facilitator documenting the domain stories in the same tool or another tool, uh, giving you the power of different perspectives when you go through the main stories in the aftermath. Also reduces the probability that some valuable insight will slip uh, uh, in between because there are several facilitators involved. As I mentioned, try to combine the different methods, and also if you are try to combine it smoothly during the same workshop. So on this slide, I assume you are familiar with event storming to a certain level. So there is a notion of hotspots in event storming, where you place a lilac post-it note to see this was a valuable discussion. This is what real insight was. Use this also during event storming workshop when maybe you're not you really understand what domain experts are telling. Maybe they disagree. Maybe there's a lot of discussion. You're not able to capture it. So just try to note it quickly, or ask somebody else, some participants to engage and create those notes. You can use them later on, and the workshop can proceed. Because the most chaotic discussions are the most valuable ones. So when you in there and feel you lose control, you cherish those moments, as strange as it sounds. And you can use some techniques from tips from game storming, which suggest combining divergent and convergent methods. So split the participant into groups and let each group do domain storytelling, and then you converge with groups meeting each other. And of course, that will require having a facilitator for each group, but it could be a viable option in certain contexts. So what about setting the stage I mentioned about? What are the overall goals? This is where impact mapping really shines. So this impact mapping is all about the goals and effects and needs. And that's really good groundwork for writing domain story. So start your workshop with a time box session with impact mapping, half an hour or maybe 45 minutes. And that will help you choose what domain stories to start with. And then summarize with Link Coffee. And the topics for Link Coffee will present themselves. During the workshop, you will have all those textual annotations and hotspots if you use them. And so all those discussions that you didn't have time to go into much details, you set up a Link Coffee at the end of the workshop and discuss them in a more relaxed environment. So I call this lean chocolate. Why lean chocolate? Well, it's kind of, look at it as a dessert after the main course. So you had your domain storytelling workshop. Now you enjoy your coffee at the end of or chocolate at the end of the workshop. Okay. Let's move on to the last part, which is discovering bounded context. So now you have your development team, which are really excited. They have learned a bunch of stuff, gained new insights. They are ready to go, ready to implement. So where to start? Or uh, uh, is there anything in domain stories that can help us choosing a good starting point for developing our application? Well, there is. But before I go on, I just need to step back and explain this term of bounded context. You may be familiar with it. It comes from domain-driven design, and what I value in domain-driven design, it's for me, it's approach for dealing with complex problems with emphasis on learning the domain. So any business with certain complexity, you focus on learning it and close collaboration with domain experts. That's why we call domain storytelling a collaborative modeling technique in domain-driven design community, because it focuses really on collaboration with domain experts. And it also focuses on the most important problems to solve. So this is something domain-driven design give you, something. Choose the most important problem, then you go looking for a solution. Domain-driven design was the term coined by Eric Evans in 2004 with his famous blue book, Tackling Complexity in the Heart of Software. And there are two pillars in domain-driven design: ubiquitous language and bounded context. Ubiquitous language urges you to develop your domain model based on the domain language. So if we use domain storytelling to learn the domain language, then domain-driven design tells you, okay, based on what you have learned about the domain language, use that to develop the domain model. So your code, your documentation, your written, all our communication inside the team all use the same language. It's ubiquitous, but within a context. And all language, I'm not a language expert, but as far as I can understand, the language is very contextual. So all this language in the domain-driven design, we call ubiquitous language to exist within a context. So the bounded context tackles complexity by splitting application via subdomain boundaries. And those subdomain boundaries, for any domain of certain complexity, there will exist a multitude of inherent subdomains. So try to find those inherent seams in the domain and model your application along those lines. So you will then, bounded contexts are then boundaries in the software system, boundaries of some kind that aspire to correspond to subdomains. You will probably or most certainly never get to align them one-to-one, but trying to align them really helps on achieving low coupling and in your application. The reason why, because it's difficult to align them, is that subdomain boundaries in the domain are kind of blurry. It turns out to be. So it means that bounded contexts are defined by the semantics of the language. So your application boundaries or boundaries within your application are actually linguistic. The language drives those boundaries. As you may have mentioned, I called the Eric Evans book Blue Book. And later on, we got both the Red Book and the Green Book in the domain design community. So, what about domain stories? Do they provide any hints? Yes, they do. They specifically try to focus on boundaries that separate models but don't separate people. We still want our our users to be able to navigate the system in a smooth way. We don't try to create any impediments for our users by defining separate models. So we want to separate models, but we don't want to separate people. Quite a challenge. But let's see how it can this turns out. The hints in the domain storytelling, in domain stories, is you look for information flow. If you recall, we used work objects, and activities to denote information flow between the actors. So if there is occurrence of one-way information flow, some kind of handover of responsibilities in the business, you use that as a hint of bounded context. Difference in language, maybe in one domain story we use a certain term with certain meaning, but the same term was used in another domain story with different meaning. That difference in language can indicate a good candidate for boundary. And there are some triggers, time triggers, on-demand triggers. I'll try to show an example of that. So before I show you how our domain story could provide hints on bounded context, it's really important to agree that this is only a starting point. This is something that we use to start our development project with, hopefully from a better place than we would have been had we not invested in understanding, collaborating with domain experts using domain storytelling and or another technique. But it's only a starting point. So you try to implement those bounded contexts as you start your development, but you need to iterate because new knowledge, while you iterate, while you deliver, and you get your feedback, lead to new insights, and new insights will lead to new bounded contexts, which could be quite different than what you started with. As a rule of thumb, uh, you need kind of three iterations to get to a model that really starts to pay off. So iteration and defining bounded context could be challenging, but it's definitely important to invest in. So, what about our domain story? Um, well, we could use those hints about one-way information flow and time triggers. So the area marked with red marker is one-way information flow of between patients and the medical secretary. The same goes for area marked in on the gray marker and the area marked with the yellow marker. So those are three bounded context candidates that are built using the hint of one-way information flow. There is a kind of handover between the involved between the different actors. Patients arrive, and then secretary verifies who have checked in. Uh, the secretary records the patient visit, then supervising physician approves it. After supervising physician has approved the visit, then the medical secretary will send an invoice to the patient. On the contrary, the green area marked with the green marker is bounded context candidate based on time trigger. So the day after the appointment, a certain activity is performed. So this could be it. A good starting point. Different language, elements are involved as well. So this could be something to go on with. However, there is a different approach which occurred to us during this very workshop. So I mentioned this slide was rather important, and of course, it turned out to be important sometime later. This insight. You need some time to digest insights and knowledge, and it turned out that um, the focus on the differences on the way domain experts conducted their business in different business areas in hospitals was in some cases, particularly between mental health care and somatic health care, there was a large difference, a noticeable difference. And those triggered us to consider, well, if they do their business so differently, uh, do they deserve different bounded contexts? So that aligns very well with what is recommended in service-oriented architecture. Now, I won't go on in detail about service-oriented architecture. It's also an old approach, and it got a lot of perhaps negative remarks during the years. But anyway, if you try to read some of the stuff that Udi Dahan is teaching, specifically in his Advanced Distributed System Design course, which I definitely recommend, he defines a service as a technical authority for a given business capability. And he suggests defining boundaries by business capabilities. So, what are the business capabilities in our case? Well, if we go on and split the application using those use cases for group check-in and group planning, we will see that both use cases need to adapt to different business capabilities. For the business capability of a hospital is to provide mental and somatic health care to their patients. Group therapy, as I see it, is more of a tool to provide that business capability. So we are in this design, we are focusing on a tool rather than focusing on a business capability, which introduces dependencies because those use cases need to be adapted to different business capabilities anyway. Then we will introduce dependencies across the boundaries. So the alternative to this is to denote the business capability or denote services as topmost level of boundaries based on use capability, and then each use case is implemented within each boundary, within each business capability. So somatic group therapy will get their own group checking and group planning, and the same goes for adult mental health care and pediatric mental health care. This way, we really achieve a low coupling. So combining domain-driven design and SOA is definitely possible. In domain storytelling, the method to discover business capabilities are so-called pure domain stories. I will not go into much detail about it. There is no time for that. But uh, in our workshop with our customers, we're really using this technique of pure domain stories. We're actually able to discover the business capabilities that kind of eluded us in the beginning. So if you want to combine this, you can try with defining topmost boundaries as services per business capabilities, and then within each service, define bounded context using a language, domain language. This deserves a topic of their own, and hopefully there will be a talk. Or next talk for me will be a more going into depth about this one, about combining SOA and DDD. So there we are, near the end. I hope you were able to take away these points with you, and hopefully I managed to make you curious enough to try this on your own when you get home. And as the last slide is some references, as I promised. There is a book about domain storytelling. The book is complete and available on LeanPub, written by Stefan Hoffer and Henning Schwentner, which work at Workspace Solution. And there will also book. There will also be a book will coming in other formats and LeanPub. There's a website which has enough information for you to get started. There's a bunch of resources on GitHub. We have a community on Slack. Please join. It's free, of course. And there is a blog of mine which goes into more details on some of the stuff I have talked about. So that's about it. I'll check you. There's a minute left. I'll check if there are any QAs. I don't see any QAs. So I'll hang around. Especially, I'm available all day tomorrow. I believe also available during the afternoon. So if there are any questions about domain storytelling or specifically domain-driven design, SOA, which are topics I really like to discuss, please reach in, or yeah, you can reach to my blog on my Twitter. So thank you. Yes, there's a question. How do you technically implement the services from the picture to a business capability? One service code base to run several business capabilities. Um, yes, there will be different code bases and perhaps rather different repositories, and you will be tempted to copy. And you will observe some copy duplication, and duplication is good in those cases because they are contextual duplications. Yes, different code bases, different repositories per service, and then you implement the use cases within each business capability. You will see some duplications, but it is good. Duplication is indication of low coupling. And again, we can discuss this later on. I guess I have to end the session right now. So thank you. I'll be available on the chat after, of course. Thank you.